Let's further explore what is required for the WWC to determine if something is a confounding factor. All three aspects in the WWC's definition are required to be a confounding factor. When a factor lacks one of these aspects, the WWC does not consider it a confounding factor. Let's take a look at some examples.
Here is an example of a single unit that appears in both conditions. Ms. Smith teaches 6 classes and implements a new math intervention in 3 of her classes. In her remaining 3 classes, the comparison classes, she teaches the regular curriculum. Although Ms. Smith is the only teacher in the study, this is not a confounding factor because Ms. Smith's teaching skills are present in both the intervention group and the comparison group. Whether Ms. Smith is a fantastic teacher or a struggling teacher, she is teaching classes in both conditions, essentially controlling for any teacher effects. In this example, Ms. Smith taught 3 classes in each condition. What if there were only 2 classes in the experiment and she taught only 1 class in each condition, 1 in the intervention group and 1 in the comparison group? In that case, there would be a confounding factor, but it is the single class in each condition that is the n=1 confounding factor, not Ms. Smith. We would not be able to separate the effect of the intervention from the effect of being in that particular class. Here is another example in which an observed factor does not align completely with one of the study conditions. Let's consider a study in which the teachers in the intervention and comparison groups have different levels of experience. A study assigns 4 teachers and their classrooms to implement or not implement a new math curriculum. Both teachers in the intervention group have extensive teaching experience. One of the teachers in the comparison group is also experienced, but the other comparison teacher is a novice. Is experience or novice status a confounding factor in this example? The WWC requires that the condition align completely with one of the study conditions to be considered a confounding factor. In this example, at least one teacher with extensive experience appears in both conditions, so this characteristic is not a confounding factor. There is overlap in the extensively experienced status. The novice teacher appears in only the comparison condition, but the other comparison teacher is experienced, so this is not a confounding factor. Novice status does not align completely with one condition. Because the comparison group is not comprised of only novice teachers, there is no confounding factor in this example. Another example of a non-confounding factor that shares some aspects of a confounding factor is volunteering for a study. Volunteers may have underlying characteristics that differ from the characteristics of study participants who did not volunteer. However, the WWC does not consider volunteering to be a confounding factor. Recruiting volunteers for a randomized control trial study is not a confounding factor if the study randomly assigns the volunteers to both conditions. Whatever motivates people to volunteer will be present in both conditions, so the volunteering does not align completely with one group. Using volunteers is not a confounding factor in a quasi-experimental design either. Let's think about why we might be concerned about a QED in which intervention group members volunteer to receive the intervention. We might worry that the volunteers are more motivated than comparison group members, which might affect outcomes. This is just an example of the general concern with QEDs that the groups may differ on unobserved characteristics. Because this is always a concern in QEDs, the highest rating a QED can receive is meets WWC standards with reservations. The with reservations portion of this rating addresses the potential bias that arises from volunteering or other differences in unobserved characteristics. In sum, although volunteering might seem to be an observed measure that could satisfy the definition of a confounding factor, the WWC treats volunteering as potentially influenced by an unobserved characteristic, like motivation, and unobserved characteristics cannot be confounding factors. Let's talk about a special case, combined interventions, meaning when a study implements two different interventions with the same intervention group and does not implement either of them with the comparison group. Let's discuss an example. Say a review focuses on intervention A, but in a particular study, the intervention group receives both intervention A and intervention B, and the comparison group doesn't receive either of these interventions. In this study, the intervention examined is the combination of A and B, not just intervention A. As a result, this study doesn't measure the effectiveness of intervention A, so it wouldn't be able to provide evidence of effectiveness for A. More generally, when a study wants to test the effect of only one intervention, but it examines that intervention in combination with another intervention, it has a confounding factor. We cannot distinguish the effects of the intervention of interest from the other intervention being used. However, if the WWC is interested in testing the effects of the combination of interventions, then the effect of both interventions is of interest, and the WWC would not consider this to be a confounding factor.